You're listening to the Place Northwest podcast, your digital resource for the latest insight and analysis on all things property in the northwest of England.
Hello and welcome to the Place Northwest podcast. I'm your host, Dan Whelan. Today's episode is brought to you in association with Onward Homes. We're going to be talking about how changes to planning policy could impact the delivery of affordable housing. In particular, the proposed move away from Section 106 contributions towards a community infrastructure levy. Joining me to shed some light on the situation is Rob Luffenberry, Director of Strategy at Onward Homes. Hello, Rob.
Hi, Dan. How you doing?
Very well, very well. Should we get into it then?
Yeah.
A lot to cover. First of all, I think it would be useful if you could tell us what an infrastructure levy is and how it differs from the planning situation at the moment with Section 106.
Absolutely. But the government's thinking of moving from having Section 106 to having an infrastructure levy instead is that, as listeners will know, there's a lot of hoo-ha that goes around when it comes to the negotiations around Section 106. That's obviously the mechanism by which councils are able to extract funds from developers then to put in place infrastructure that is specifically, in most cases, related to the development they're delivering. Now, I think a common complaint across the development sector, probably councils too, anyone involved in planning, is that those negotiations are often very long. They can be protracted, they can be complicated, and they come with a great degree of uncertainty in some cases. And what you see on the back of that is that there are some specific complaints that people have different perspectives on, but they do arise from the process. So, for example, common political complaint is that developers hide behind, for example, viability and say, well, you know, we've done a study which shows that we can't possibly afford to give you what you're asking for. But then the question of whether the evidence for that is forthcoming, and there's a lot of perception issues around Section 106. So I think on the face of it, certainly the government's explanation for why they would be doing this is to reduce complexity and to increase certainty for developers, for communities, and for local authorities. I think a second aspect to that, though, is the more political aspect to it. So a hot question is how much of the Section 106 goes towards providing affordable homes. Now, what I think is often not realised by many people involved in the process, and I didn't really realise it myself until commissioned as part of the Homes to the North Housing Association Campaign and Alliance. We commissioned some research by University of Liverpool looking into how Section 106 has been used in the past and how a levy might be used in the future. One of the things that pulled out that I thought was really interesting was the sheer quantity of Section 106 that does go towards affordable housing. So in terms of Section 106 contributions over the past, I think, 5 or so years, fully 78% of that goes towards providing affordable housing. So Section 106 is primarily a mechanism for extracting developers' contributions to deliver affordable housing. Nationally, that tends to deliver about half of the affordable homes that are built in England. So going back to 2016, 2017, there were planning consents granted for 50,000 affordable homes that would be funded by Section 106. That number decreased till 2021, 22, when it fell to about 38,000, so a drop of about 25%. But nonetheless, the key message here is that Section 106 delivers lots of affordable homes. Now, what we've heard from the government is two contrasting things. So on the one hand, throughout the process where government has been promoting the idea of an infrastructure levy, they've kept using the phrase that this will deliver at least as much affordable housing as Section 106 has done previously. Haven't said how that will happen, but we can get into that in due course. However, what you've also heard from other Conservative politicians, from ministers in fact, is suggesting that the whole point of moving to a levy system is that it gives local authorities the freedom to spend money on things that aren't affordable housing, because in their mind, all of this money is being hoovered up by affordable housing, but actually it would be better to spend it on doctor surgeries, on roads, on lots of different things. So the political motivation behind it, you hear different things at different times from different people.
Mm. So the concern then is that if we do move from this Section 106 to an infrastructure levy, that the delivery of affordable housing might fall off a cliff overnight. And how's that going to be replaced? That's your main concern with the infrastructure levy?
Absolutely, yes, because the idea that's promoted at the heart of the infrastructure levy is one of freedom of choice for local authorities and being able to reflect local priorities, which on paper sounds right and proper. Local authorities under the proposals, they'd have a lot of latitude in terms of the rates that they set for how the levy would be raised. They would then have a lot of freedom as well for how that money would be spent. So it could be spent on different kinds of infrastructure. Interestingly, one of the proposals that's been put forward by a Conservative politician looks like it might be adopted as part of the infrastructure levy, is that the money could even be spent on things that aren't infrastructure. So an infrastructure levy that is not necessarily spent on affordable housing, but could theoretically be spent on anything as well. So it's difficult to predict with certainty exactly how the money will be spent, because it will depend what political decisions are taken in different places. We did have a look at one point of trying to model what the outcomes of the levy would be, but because there's that element of political choice, it's very difficult to do. So I think we'll see two things. I think we'll see a lack of consistency. I think you'll get very different picture in different local authorities, depending on what the political priorities are. But overall, I think it's fair to say that we should expect that it's unlikely that local authorities across England, on average, would continue to spend as much as 78% of the levy on affordable housing. So it could be something that, for philosophical principles, it sounds great. Freedoms to local authorities, practically, that sounds great as well. What's the outcome going to be? I suspect the outcome will be that affordable housing provision in England, as a result of this, but overall as well, would fall off a cliff.
Okay. And would this put a significant squeeze on the poorer local authority areas in comparison to the more affluent ones, for example? What's the dynamic with regards to distribution with this proposed change?
Distribution-wise, one of the grumbles that we've had with the infrastructure levy, but going back to Section 106 as well, is that we wanted to see particularly how Section 106, how the infrastructure levy, how they measure up against the government's levelling up agenda. And the way we did that, and again, this is research that was conducted on behalf of Homes to the North by University of Liverpool. The way we did that is we used the levelling up priority categories that are applied by the government to the Levelling Up Fund. So the government has its three categories of local authorities, saying Category 1 areas, these really need to level up. Category 2, kind of in the middle. Category 3, they're doing okay. They're not the places that need to level up. Now, as you would expect, the Category 1 areas, which are variously struggling, often called left behind places by some commentators, the land values there aren't very high. So any local tax that raises development revenues locally and spends them locally, that will be limited for an area with low land values, where there's less land value that can be captured. Whereas in a Category 3 area, an area that's doing very well, you would expect that the land values there are going to be higher, so it's easier to extract money from the development process and then to spend that locally. What we found in the analysis we did of how Section 106 has been generated and spent previously is that in those Category 1 areas, so these are the areas that most need to level up, they generated 18% of national Section 106 contributions generated overall. So all the money generated by Section 106, nationally, 18% of that was in areas that need to level up. Category 3 areas with high land values managed to generate 44% of that value. So what we're seeing is, because of its localized nature, Section 106 actively has worked against levelling up. So our position would not be Section 106 is perfect. It delivers everything we want it to in exactly the way that it does. It's a system with its drawbacks, but overall, in key respect of delivering affordable homes, it's kind of worked, even if those homes haven't necessarily been in the right place to level up. What we find with the infrastructure levy is that because it remains raised locally and spent locally, it won't do anything to change that logic. Now, while it might be, the comeback to that might be, it would be unfair to expect it to do so. It's the government that has chosen to put the infrastructure levy at the heart of its levelling up a regeneration bill. And it seems a bit weird that at the heart of a levelling up bill, there is a measure that will not help levelling up and will continue to work actively against it. So we've got two issues with it, really. One of them is the quantity thing. Overall, fewer affordable homes being delivered across England. On the distribution thing, homes will continue to be delivered in a way that actively works against levelling up.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Like you say, Section 106 by no means perfect, but this one that we're potentially moving into, the infrastructure levy, is not perfect either. But where are we up to with the process? Because it's part of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, as you mentioned, which hasn't been adopted yet. Is it still in the consultation phase? And could the infrastructure levy change between now and when it's actually adopted?
So the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill is staggering towards the line in the House of Lords at the moment. So it's been in the parliamentary oven for quite a while now, and I think it's fair to say that the general assessment of it from housing association community, development community, was that the bill as it was originally conceived had lots of interesting ideas in it. It was a real serious attempt at joined up government, probably had ambitions that outstripped the scope of the department that put it forward in terms of DLUC holding the pen, but then suggesting that there should be a certain logic of how money is spent across a whole different range of different parts of government. Almost read like the prototype of a manifesto rather than something that particular department would be able to deliver. I think there was also a sense that it was well intentioned, but it didn't really have many teeth. And so it was a heading in the right direction, could be the basis for more interest in specific things to follow further down the line. And ultimately, it wouldn't do very much harm. We had specific concerns around the infrastructure levy, which we're working through at the moment and we're talking about. What I think then happened was that bill, so much of the rest of the legislative process was kind of put in the ice bucket when the Conservative Party was imploding, the country was in chaos over the course of the last 6 months and all this stuff that happened. But then you come out of the other end of the sausage factory and suddenly you've got the same Secretary of State, more or less the same government, different leadership, and so the legislation was picked up again. Where we've got to now is that the bill has made its way through the Commons and is now at the Lords stage of the bill. It has just completed its second reading in the House of Lords, and it's now heading towards committee stage in the House of Lords, which will be an all-house committee. So everybody's invited, like the biggest, most boring party you can possibly imagine. Everyone's going to turn up and they'll debate it for, I think, a period of 8 days, up to 8 days, starting on the 20th of February.
Okay. And if you could make, one amendment to this proposed infrastructure levy that would, have an impact on the delivery of affordable housing, i.e. not make it fall off a cliff, what would that be? What would that look like?
So there's a few different lines of attack that can be taken on that, and it's a popular part of the bill, and there's lots of different people with bright ideas that are promoting them to various folk and trying to suggest that this is the one thing that should happen. So a few of the different options. One of them is a concern that if this remains a locally generated tax, that it might not, in any particular local authority, generate enough funds in terms of the sheer amount of money to go and deliver the number of affordable homes that are needed. So there could be an amendment in it that says local authorities must raise enough funds to be able to address their affordable housing need, so a quantity of money thing. My preferred alternative to that, and this is an amendment that has now been tabled in the House of Lords by Lord Best, is requiring local authorities to spend a certain proportion of the money that they raise from the levy on affordable housing, unless and until they have met the need that they have specified in their local plan. Now, in terms of what that proportion could be, pick a number. The one we've gone for is 75%. And the reason for that is going back to my earlier comment. Historically, recent years, 78% of Section 106 gets spent on affordable housing. So given that the government has said that this should deliver at least as much affordable housing, then it doesn't seem unreasonable to say that 75% of this should be ring-fenced for affordable housing until that need has been met.
Right. Yeah, understandable, like you say. And even that's a bit of a concession, isn't it? The 78 down to 75. I wonder, and this may be sort of me living in an idealistic world, but with Section 106 moving and that mechanism changing, might we see local authorities be more willing to enforce their own planning policy legislation in terms of affordable housing provision for on-site provision rather than relying on those contributions for off-site? Because as you said before, often we see developers kind of hide behind viability and say, I can't meet the 20% provision or 15% provision or whatever it might be. And then there's an off-site contribution, which often isn't sort of equal to what would have been delivered on-site. Could you imagine a scenario with the infrastructure levy that we might see councils be a bit more forceful on that point?
We could do. I think it would likely to look quite uneven. And I think that the first question that needs to be answered, and is a matter of live debate at the moment, is whether councils will be given the muscle to be able to do that. So it has long been stated by the government that there is an intention with the infrastructure levy to have something that would be called the right to require. So local authorities would have the right to be able to, and the muscle to be able to say to a developer, right, instead of just giving us money in terms of the proceeds from the infrastructure levy, some of that should be a payment, in fact, must be a payment in kind in the form of affordable housing delivered on site. Now, the government has made reassuring noises on that front throughout the process. There is likely to be an amendment tabled by someone or other in the Lords that would say that the right to require or something similar should be included in the bill. I think the response to the government to that is likely to be the same response it gives to most of the amendments, which is to say, no problem with that in principle, but that's something for the regulations rather than for the legislation. I think it will, if I was a betting guy, I would say that it will probably happen because it fits in with the philosophy of the bill overall, which is to hand power and control to local authorities. So it could be given, I think it's likely to be given to local authorities as something that they can choose to apply. What you find is that some local authorities will be quite muscular with it, other ones would not be muscular with it. So I think that there would be a certain amount of geographical variation, which may bother some people. Other folk, I think, wouldn't be fussed. My sense is for the development community, as long as they knew what the policy was and the rules from the outset of beginning on a development adventure, I think it will be okay. I think another way in which the variation between local authorities is going to be really interesting is that I think we're going to see some of them setting up as Singapore. So they set nice low levy rates with the intention of attracting investment. Such and such a borough is open for business. Look at our low taxes. Come and invest here. Other places will set themselves up as France. And on paper, they'll say, we've got a very high infrastructure levy rates here. And it's because we're ambitious about delivering infrastructure. We're ambitious about affordable housing. What it might actually be is a way to put off house builders that they would rather stayed away from their borough and to deter investment and to deter development. The other thing I think you'll find is that if you do have a borough that is desperate for investment and sets a low levy rate to do that, it's likely to be a borough that has low land values anyway. So they'll have low land values, they'll set a low tax rate. As a result of that, they might have a very high need for affordable housing, but they're not generating very much funding to be able to go and deliver it. So I think in the practice of this, there's going to be a lot of inconsistency across the country, and it will cause different kinds of problems in different places.
Okay. And what role can Homes England play here in terms of ensuring that the pipeline of affordable homes across the country, stays healthy?
If it wanted to really make sure that we're delivering as many affordable homes as possible in a way that is going to support the ambition of the government and what I think is a cross-party consensus to level up, then Homes England is going to have to, in my view, fundamentally change the way it approaches distributing funds nationally. So at the moment, Homes England, in its statutory objectives, which are set down in law, it's all about quantity and quality. So number of homes, making sure homes are good enough. It cannot, in law, take a geographical approach, and in fact, it is necessarily geographically blind in that respect. I think if Homes England was to be serious about it, then it would need to be mandated, and this would need to be a political decision. It's not something Homes England can just decide to do. A political decision to mandate Homes England to reduce regional inequality in England. If that was one of its strategic objectives, that would fundamentally change the way in which grant funding flowed around the country. Now, where that would become relevant for the infrastructure levy is that we've spoken about this 18% of the funding goes to category 1 areas, 44% to category 3 areas. One of the things that University of Liverpool calculated for us was the value gap that this creates. So value gap in investment in new affordable homes based on developer contributions between category 1 areas and category 3 areas. Depending on what year you look at, that varies between 750 million and 1.3 billion. So there is a value gap to be plugged there. As a starting point, my view would be that Homes England would need to undertake in, for example, the next iteration of its affordable homes programme to plug that value gap, because otherwise this disparity of grant funding for new affordable homes between category 1 and category 3 areas, that will continue to be baked in, and it will continue to exacerbate regional inequality.
Can you see that happening realistically? These changes that you're talking about with Homes England and the way they operate, can you see that happening anytime soon?
I think that there is a prospect of it happening, but I think high politics is going to get in the way. So what I think is possibly a more likely direction for things to go in future years is based around the emerging or the strengthening cross-party consensus on regional devolution, particularly the way in which Labour Party are doubling down on regional devolution as one of their big ideas for how they were to govern, if indeed they were to win the election in 2025. What we might see is, rather than a national agency hardwiring a levelling up logic into how it distributes a national fund, I suspect we're more likely to see, for example, the Affordable Homes Programme be handed down in chunks to, if not all combined authorities, then certainly some of them, given them the funding, given them the levers, and saying, crack on then, you deliver your Affordable Homes Programme in Greater Manchester or in Liverpool City region. If that were to happen, then that would obviously be a very big gear change, but I think what we would expect to see on that basis is that the dial would move in terms of where national resources are going. So I suspect one way or another there will be more resources available for the North, for example, for levelling up areas in the North. Whether that happens through a rebooted Homes England or a dash towards devolution, I suspect it's more likely to be the latter.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about the NPPF a little bit as well, because that's causing quite a stir, the proposed changes to that in terms of making housing targets advisory and the impact that could have on housing delivery generally, not just affordable housing delivery. And I guess my question really with that is what is the knock-on impact of all of this change that we're seeing with the Levelling Up Bill and the NPPF?
Well, I think the first thing I'll throw in on the subject of the NPPF is, of course, the worst poison for the development industry is uncertainty. And I think we've seen with GMSF, God rest its soul, Places for Everyone, that whenever a big change in standard methodology, the NPPF, is mooted, then not unreasonably, the reaction from local authorities is, let's just pause on our local plans and let's just take a moment to see how this is going to play out before we commit ourselves. And I completely get that. It's completely fair. I heard at a meeting yesterday that apparently since the NPPF revisions were published and the consultation on them began, already 40 local plans in England have been paused on the back of that as a result of it. So even the uncertainty based around another set of revisions to it is going to delay in development in the medium to the long term. In terms of the content of the revisions, I think it's a dangerous moment, particularly for the delivery of affordable housing across England, across the north of England, for the rest of this decade. Because if you combine a situation where housing targets are advisory, there's no requirement to have an identified land supply, greenbelt protections are strengthened, then on the back of that, there is an infrastructure levy which is likely to see fewer funds going towards affordable housing. The cumulative impact of that, if we go back to 2016, 2017 and say there was 50,000 consents awarded for affordable homes in England, what's that going to look like in 2028? If it's 20% of that, I think we'll be lucky, to be honest. So I think the cumulative effect of it is potentially very severe for the level of affordable housing delivery in England. The two provisos there are, number one, will the Levelling Up Bill and the consultation on the NPPF, will those things be passed? Yeah, I think they probably will, barring something very dramatic happening. Second question is, do they have time to be embedded before potentially a new government comes in and inevitably, after sizing up the curtains, all that kind of stuff, they decide planning reform, that's really interesting, let's take a look at that. So those wheels will start turning again. So will these changes become properly embedded? I don't know. But even the uncertainty they create at this moment, I think, will have a deleterious effect on the delivery of affordable homes for years to come.
And you have a political background, don't you, Rob? Can you, from drawing on your experience there, tell us why you think planning is so political at the moment, but why it has always been so political?
The problem, Dan, as you very delicately pointed out, housing is my fourth attempt at a successful career. And I won't tell you about the first two, but the third one was politics. So I did, for a long time, work for the Conservative Party in a campaign manager kind of capacity. Ended up in 2015 standing as a target seat candidate in a parliamentary constituency in the Northwest. Turned out I wasn't very good at it, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing now instead of having fun in Parliament. But my reading of what's happening in the Parliament at the moment, and particularly with the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, is that the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill has become primarily a vehicle for the management of the parliamentary party, the Conservative Parliamentary Party. So it was something that was a totemic piece of legislation that encapsulated what this government was trying to do. I think what we're seeing is a demonstration that 30, 40 Conservative MPs get together on any particular issue. They've got the ability to make the government change course on stuff. And I think that's what we saw with the group of MPs that came together, and the protestations they've made have then resulted particularly in the changes that we've seen, the proposed changes to the NPPF. So the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill has gone from something that was imperfect but forward-looking and ambitious to something that, allied to the NPPF consultation, is not good policy, in my view. Probably good politics in terms of how you manage the parliamentary party, but I think policy and house building at the moment looks like it will be the victim of good politics.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating from our perspective to kind of look in, but also equally frustrating as well. Right, Rob, I want you to get your crystal ball out now, please. You mentioned before there that you think maybe we'd be lucky to have even 20% of that 50,000 consented affordable homes that we had in 2016. Let's look forward 10 years in the future. Tell me where you think we'll be, but what the alternative is. What if we change course or make the necessary tweaks where we could be?
If the Levelling Up Bill with the infrastructure levy as outlined at the moment, pending amendments that may come to it, if the NPPF consultation, if all of those things are passed, they become embedded and they are not subsequently challenged by whatever government is in place after 2025, then I think we'll see over the next 10 years, we'll see the delivery of homes in England steadily decline to a much lower place than it is even at the moment. And probably the proportion of those homes that are affordable, that will diminish as well. So affordable homes would constitute a diminishing slice of a diminishing pie. I think if we get this right, I think the infrastructure levy can be amended in such a way as that the affordable housing is explicitly made a priority that local authorities have to, in a very strong way, have attention to in the amount of money that they put towards affordable housing, whatever quantum that is that's generated locally. I think if that protection is put in there and the proposed changes to the NPPF either do not land, which I think they will, but alternatively are subsequently unpicked and a more friendly policy environment comes forward, then I think we could see that the outlook is not as bad as we're fearing it might be at the moment. I think for a really good outcome, for things to be much better, I think that probably depends on two things. I think one of them is the ability of the affordable housing sector in particular to raise funds to deliver homes. Now, that in part needs to be grant funding from the government. It also needs to be a government policy framework that allows us to continue to engender confidence in our institutional investors, so they are willing to invest in us to continue to deliver new homes. So the funding part of it is really important. I think another part of it is what devolution looks like if and when that actually happens. I think the worst of all worlds is that kind of half the powers and half the funding are handed down to combined authorities, and then neither the combined authority nor the national authorities feel that they finally have responsibility for moving the dial on the delivery of affordable homes. And if it sits between them, then I think that would be a suboptimal situation. The other one I'll throw in there as well, which I think is an interesting trend, is that we've seen from humble beginnings, from small beginnings, the very fast growth of the for-profit registered providers subsector. Now, in recent years, that has mostly been based in London and the Southeast. I think my understanding is that some of the big players are increasingly looking to the north and thinking, okay, how can our business model work in these different markets? I think for the Conservative Party, there's a clear ideological lean there. Thought that why would we restrict registered providers to not being allowed to make a profit? If they can make a profit and they can deliver stuff, then fantastic. Let's enable them to do that. So I think certainly under a Conservative government, probably under a Labour government as well, I think we'll continue to see that part of the sector rise. I think a risk for traditional registered providers is that it seemed to be the new kids on the block, the for-profits who are delivering the numbers, whereas we are required to stick to our knitting a lot more and make sure that the homes that we already provide are good quality, they're warm, they're dry, they're affordable. And honestly, there's a lot to recommend that argument. Everything we've seen in recent months in the media is that in too many cases, social housing is not good enough. So you could imagine a political view that is, you guys take care of the quality, these guys will take care of the quantity. I think one interesting wrinkle in this is that the for-profits in the early days, their business model in many cases is very much based on hoovering up Section 106 and hoovering up homes that are generated through Section 106. If I were them, I would be, and I'm sure they are, don't need my advice certainly, they would be reviewing their business plans, because the mechanism for delivering affordable homes that many of them have started building this business on, that mechanism is about to change. And I think the impact of that change is going to be many fewer homes coming forward. So there's something there for the for-profit sector to work out.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, thank you so much for joining us. It's been fascinating, and thank you as well for laying it out so clearly for us all to understand, because it is a complex situation that's going on with all the amendments and all the bills and all the framework. So thank you so much for that, and thank you everybody for listening. I hope you can join us next time for another Place Northwest podcast.